My name is Jessica, and I am 27 years old. It was one of those beautiful autumn afternoons when the light seemed softer than usual, as though the sun itself had slowed down to enjoy the day. I had spent the morning at work listening to other people's troubles, and now I wanted nothing more complicated than a quiet hour among books. I lived alone, and although I sometimes told myself I enjoyed the independence, there were evenings when the silence in my apartment seemed almost too large for one person. So I pushed open the door of a small bookstore I loved, breathing in that familiar mixture of paper, dust, and something I could never quite name. I wandered slowly between the shelves, running my fingers along the spines without really looking at the titles, until I found myself standing in front of the romance section. I glanced over my shoulder, almost embarrassed that someone might see me there, because romantic stories felt like a guilty pleasure I was supposed to have outgrown. And yet I loved them. The impossible meetings, the accidental touches, the moments when two strangers somehow knew they had found each other. I suppose some secret part of me was always waiting for something like that to happen to me, although I would never have admitted it aloud. I pulled a new book from the shelf, one I had never seen before, and opened it somewhere in the middle. Within a few minutes, I had forgotten the shop, the autumn afternoon, even the people moving quietly around me, and my thoughts had begun drifting somewhere between the printed words and my own private dreams. What if life really did contain moments that changed everything without warning? What if you could walk into an ordinary place on an ordinary day and, without knowing it, walk out carrying the beginning of a memory you would treasure for years? That's one of the best-selling books this month. The voice beside me startled me so completely that I nearly dropped the book, and when I looked up, a handsome young man was smiling at me. If you have any questions, or if there's any other way I can help, just let me know. I felt the blood rush into my cheeks, suddenly aware of how ridiculous I must have looked standing there, lost in a romance novel, and I stammered, No, I don't have any questions. I'll take it." Before I could embarrass myself any further, I pressed the book into his hands and hurried toward the checkout, pretending to be intensely interested in the display of bookmarks beside the counter. He followed a moment later and placed the book gently on the counter, smiling at me as though he had noticed far more than I wanted him to. "Is the book for you, or should I wrap it as a gift?" he asked. "A gift," I answered, far too quickly, and somewhere inside me, a little voice laughed, because really, who was I trying to fool? While the book was being wrapped, I watched him from the corner of my eye, and I noticed the small things, the way he folded the paper carefully, the quiet concentration on his face, the warmth in his smile. When he handed it to me, my fingers fumbled with my handbag as I searched for my wallet. "It's quite all right," he said, gently touching my hand, and then he added with a soft smile, "It is a gift, after all." For a second, I simply stared at him because I wasn't sure whether I had imagined the warmth in his touch or the meaning behind his words. Then our eyes met, and something shifted inside me. Not something dramatic or impossible, just a tiny door opening onto a possibility I hadn't known was there. I smiled, suddenly unable to think of anything clever to say, and whispered, "Thank you." He smiled back, and somehow that was enough. I stepped outside with the wrapped book pressed against my chest, and the autumn air felt strangely bright against my face. I walked home slowly, smiling at nothing, wondering whether I would ever see him again, and knowing that perhaps I wouldn't. Maybe that was what made the moment so beautiful. Nothing had been promised, nothing had been planned, and yet for a few minutes, the world had seemed to whisper that something wonderful was still possible. And as the leaves moved around my feet in the golden afternoon light, I found myself thinking that perhaps the most magical encounters in life are not the ones that last forever, but the ones that quietly remind us that forever might still be waiting somewhere ahead.